The story of young Costa Rican Mariam Vallejo shook the entire nation, leaving even the most composed individuals in disbelief. What seemed like an ordinary argument escalated into an irreversible tragedy. Those who believed they knew her story soon uncovered hidden layers, a world of endless manipulation, toxic relationships, and love games that frequently crossed the line. Mariam had dreamed of keeping her family together, but her love ultimately cost her life. What really happened on that ill-fated day? And who is responsible for her death? Unhealthy relationships are not worth fighting for or trying to save. At their core, they resemble living on a powder keg, primed to ignite with constant arguments, manipulations, resentment, and attempts at control. A destructive partner may not only resort to physical aggression, but can also inflict emotional harm. This often takes the form of breaking down their partner's confidence, instilling feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, and the belief that they cannot survive without them. Through persistent criticism and belittlement, they invalidate their partner's accomplishments and crush their sense of self. Such a relationship only leads to pain, disappointment, and an absence of any hope for a future together. Who was Mariam Vallejo? Mariam Andrea Fernandez. Vallejo was born on February 19, 1998, in Heredia, the capital of the province of the same name in Costa Rica. She was the oldest of 3 children in the family of Douglas Fernandez Aguilaro and his wife, Ivania Marieta Vallejo. Her parents worked hard to ensure their children had everything they needed, received a good education, and grew up to be respectable individuals. From a young age, Mariam was known for her striking beauty, which only became more apparent as she grew older. By her teenage years, she had a model-like appearance: long black hair, large expressive eyes, a symmetrical face, and a flawless figure. Unsurprisingly, she had many admirers vying for her attention. Those who knew Mariam personally described her as intelligent, cheerful, outgoing, and friendly. She was always ready to help others. She excelled academically and dreamed of pursuing a career in journalism and social communications. At the age of 18, she became a student at a prestigious university in San Jose, where she studied editorial work and broadcast journalism. Her parents were proud of their eldest daughter, confident that she would achieve success in her chosen field. However, not long after she began studying in the capital, she entered into a relationship that, sadly, would bring her nothing but trouble. Mariam's family sensed this from the start, but blinded by love, the young woman refused to listen to anyone. Who was Marvin Bernes? Marvin Alonso Bernes was born in 1992 in San Jose and was the oldest of 2 children in a wealthy and well-known family. His parents owned a large chain of pharmacies and several department stores in the capital. Marvin grew up alongside his younger sister, with whom he was very close, and the two always supported each other. As a child, Marvin was spoiled and demanding, never experiencing denial of anything he wanted. His parents always excused his behavior and protected him from the consequences of his actions, no matter how severe. This lack of boundaries led Marvin to develop harmful habits at a young age. As a teenager, he became involved with alcohol and prohibited substances. He frequently attended parties at popular venues, had numerous short-lived relationships, and lived without any plans for the future, fully reliant on his parents' wealth. On his 18th birthday, his parents gifted him an expensive car, which he often drove recklessly and under the influence, frequently getting into trouble. When his parents realized they had lost control over their son, they threatened to take back the car and cut him off from the family accounts. But Marvin knew all too well that his parents would never follow through on their threats, so he continued to ignore their warnings. By the time Marvin turned 20, the once skinny young man had started taking his appearance seriously. He became a regular at the gym, focusing on building muscle. This newfound interest in fitness led him to stop using prohibited substances and significantly cut back on alcohol consumption. Soon, another passion emerged. Marvin began covering his body with bold and colorful tattoos. However, a few years later, his enthusiasm for fitness faded. Believing his physique was already ideal, he stopped working out and returned to his old lifestyle of loud parties, heavy drinking, and substance use. With his expensive car, designer wardrobe, and carefree spending of his parents' money, Marvin had no trouble meeting women. In fact, many approached him first, drawn to his flashy lifestyle. There's no clear information about how Marvin first met the reserved beauty Mariam. Some sources suggest they were introduced by mutual friends who invited Mariam to a party, while others claim Marvin stumbled across Vallejo's social media profile, was instantly captivated by her looks, showered her with compliments, and quickly asked her out. Their relationship, which began in the spring of 2016, was tumultuous from the very start. Marvin treated Mariam as though she were his property, and even his affectionate gestures often carried an undertone of aggression and control. For instance, he would pinch her hard enough to leave bruises or roughly grab her chin during conversations to force her to look at him. Their private moments were no exception to this unsettling dynamic. Mariam once confided in a close friend that Marvin had a habit of choking her, claiming it was playful. However, there were times when his actions went too far, leaving her genuinely afraid for her life. Despite this, Mariam, being inexperienced in relationships, saw Marvin as her first serious boyfriend, her first great love, and the first man in her life. Naive and unaware of the danger she was in, she convinced herself that Marvin would never truly harm her. She rationalized his behavior as a strange way of showing his affection and was willing to forgive him. When Mariam introduced Marvin to her parents for the first time, they immediately sensed something was wrong. They were alarmed by the way Marvin treated their daughter. His behavior was rough and disrespectful, even in their presence. They couldn't help but wonder what might happen when the couple was alone. Douglas and Ivania tried to reason with Mariam, urging her to end the relationship. They believed nothing good would come from it. Marvin struck them as immature, lacking ambition, and without any clear goals or plans for the future. However, Mariam passionately defended him, insisting that he was a good person who loved her deeply, even if his way of expressing it was unconventional. She argued that he was simply searching for his path in life. Left with no choice, her parents reluctantly accepted their daughter's decision and hoped for the best. Miriam's friends grew increasingly concerned after she began dating Marvin. The once cheerful and outgoing young woman became a shadow of her former self. It seemed her entire world now revolved around her boyfriend, and she wouldn't go anywhere or talk to anyone without his approval. Friends also noticed bruises on her body, but Mariam always brushed them off as accidents or her own clumsiness. In October 2016, news broke that Mariam was pregnant. The revelation shocked her parents, her boyfriend, and even Mariam herself. At just 18 years old, the university student and her boyfriend were completely unprepared for such a life-changing event. However, Mariam quickly decided she would keep the baby. Ivania and Douglas, her parents, supported her decision and promised to help her raise their grandchild. They urged Mariam not to drop out of university and insisted that she avoid marrying the baby's father. Marvin initially pressured Mariam to terminate the pregnancy, but when he realized she wouldn't go through with it, his behavior grew more controlling. He began telling her she would never be free of him. After learning about the pregnancy, Marvin's treatment of Mariam worsened. He openly cheated on her, spent nights at parties where he indulged in alcohol and prohibited substances, yet continued to monitor her every move. He insulted her at every opportunity, making cruel comments about how she would soon gain weight, become clumsy, and lose her attractiveness. Marvin repeatedly told Mariam that no one else would want her and that if she left him, she would end up alone forever. Despite the constant insults and emotional abuse, Marvin desperately tried to convince Mariam that they needed to get married. He framed his proposal as a noble act, claiming he wanted to save her from the stigma of being a single mother. However, his actions showed no real care or compassion for her. When Mariam felt unwell, he told her to stay away from him and not bother him with her problems. In mid-December 2016, despite all the warnings from her loved ones, Mariam agreed to marry Marvin. However, Marvin's parents were also against the union. They refused to provide any financial support to the young couple, believing that Mariam had deliberately gotten pregnant to take advantage of their family's wealth. They even threatened to disown their grandchild. With no financial stability or place to live, the couple had no choice but to accept the offer from Mariam's parents. Douglas and Ivania allowed them to move into their home temporarily, either until the baby was born or until Marvin found a job to afford their own place. Mariam's parents covered all expenses, effectively supporting their pregnant daughter and her unemployed husband, a domestic tyrant. Marvin was an irresponsible, lazy, and disrespectful young man with a host of bad habits he had no intention of giving up. He readily took advantage of the kindness of Mariam's parents, eating at their table, borrowing money, and continuing his carefree bachelor lifestyle. Worse, Marvin would insult and humiliate his wife in front of her family. And when her parents tried to stand up to him, Mariam would always defend her husband. One day, during another heated argument, Marvin grabbed Mariam by the neck and began choking her. Her father, Douglas, witnessed the incident, rushed to his daughter's aid, and struck Marvin several times. Marvin responded by hurling obscenities at the entire family and declared he would never set foot in their home again. He packed his belongings and, despite the tears and pleas of his pregnant wife, walked out. From that day forward, Mariam cried constantly and rarely left her room. She blamed her father for what had happened and accused her parents of interfering in her marriage. Even after everything, Mariam still didn't recognize the danger of Marvin's actions, his physical aggression, even during her pregnancy, and clung to the belief that they could build a happy future together. About a week before her due date, Marvin, who hadn't contacted Mariam in nearly 4 months, suddenly appeared at the Vallejo family's doorstep. He claimed to have reflected on his actions and was now ready to take responsibility for their child and support the family. Marvin apologized to Mariam and her parents, but made it clear he had no intention of moving back into their home. In July 2017, Mariam gave birth to a baby girl, whom she named Luciana. The child's father visited them at the hospital only once and then disappeared for another month. When he finally showed up at Mariam's parents' home, it was clear nothing about his behavior had changed. Sometimes Marvin would arrive drunk or under the influence of prohibited substances. He acted belligerently, insulted everyone, and refused to leave when asked. He often asserted his parental rights, even threatening to take Luciana away through legal action, hinting at his family's wealth and connections. Shockingly, he also demanded that Mariam fulfill her marital obligations. Most troubling of all, Marvin continued to monitor Mariam's every move. He insisted on knowing where she went, who she met, and what she did, maintaining control over her life and treating her as if she were his property. Despite all of this, the topic of divorce was never even considered. The first attempt at a crime. On the evening of December 23, 2017, Marvin showed up at the Vallejo family home, ostensibly to visit his daughter. However, from the moment he arrived, he seemed agitated and ready to provoke an argument. When he approached the crib and saw that the baby was asleep, his frustration boiled over. He began shouting, accusing Mariam of deliberately putting their 5-month-old daughter to bed to prevent him from spending time with her. Marvin's anger escalated, and he violently shook the crib, waking and frightening the baby. Mariam rushed to comfort Luciana and pleaded with Marvin to leave. Instead, he threatened to take their daughter away and prevent Mariam from ever seeing her again. Their argument grew more heated, and suddenly, Marvin grabbed Mariam by the neck, forcing her to the floor as he began choking her. At the time, they were in an upstairs bedroom while the rest of the family was downstairs, unaware of the commotion. Mariam couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and couldn't call for help. She felt herself slipping into unconsciousness and believed she wouldn't survive. Just as she was preparing for the worst, her father, Douglas, walked into the room to check on them. For a brief moment, Douglas froze at the sight of Marvin attacking his daughter. Then, without hesitation, he charged at his son-in-law, pushing him off Mariam and saving her life. Marvin yelled insults and threats as he stormed out of the house. It took Mariam nearly half an hour to calm down and catch her breath after the ordeal. The next day, Mariam finally found the courage to go to the police and report the assault and attempted crime. She provided evidence, showing bruises, defensive wounds on her arms, and the distinct marks of fingers and palms on her neck. The injuries made it clear she had been attacked and strangled. The authorities took her statement seriously and immediately went to arrest Marvin. However, shortly after Marvin's arrest, his parents and sister came to Mariam's home to plead with her to drop the charges. They accused her of trying to ruin the life of her child's father and used every emotional tactic to sway her. Under pressure, Mariam gave in and withdrew her statement the following day. As a result, Marvin faced no consequences for his actions. A fatal reconciliation and a mysterious death. About a month and a half after the incident, Marvin began pleading with Mariam to reconcile and live together as a family for the sake of their daughter. Despite her parents' strong objections, Mariam eventually decided to give him another chance. She was still deeply in love with him and held on to the hope that Marvin would change and finally take responsibility for his actions. This time, the couple moved into a cozy country house owned by Marvin's family. He insisted he would no longer live under the same roof as Mariam's parents, claiming they interfered too much in their relationship. They relocated to their new home on March 18, 2018, but just 11 days later, a horrifying tragedy cut short the life of the young mother. On that fateful day, the couple reportedly had another heated argument. According to Marvin, Mariam locked herself in the bathroom and turned the music up loudly. After about 15 minutes, Marvin knocked on the door and called her name but received no response. He forced the door open with his shoulder and found Mariam lying unconscious on the floor. Marvin attempted to revive her, but for reasons unclear, he didn't immediately call emergency services. Instead, his first call was to his mother. As a result, Marvin's mother and sister were the first to arrive at the scene. It was only after their arrival that someone finally called for an ambulance, but precious time had already been lost. When paramedics arrived, they found Mariam's body lying naked on the bathroom floor. She had multiple bruises on her body, her head was bleeding from a visible wound, and blood pooled beneath her. Initially, it appeared she may have slipped and fallen. However, defensive wounds on her arms and bruising around her neck suggested a more sinister explanation. While paramedics worked desperately to stabilize Mariam, Marvin's mother and sister began cleaning the bathroom, as though nothing unusual had occurred. One of the paramedics found their behavior highly suspicious and reported it to law enforcement. By the time police arrived, the bathroom had been thoroughly cleaned with detergents, likely erasing any potential evidence. Meanwhile, Mariam was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors managed to restart her heart twice, but after a third cardiac arrest, they could do no more. Mariam's parents, Ivania and Douglas, arrived at the hospital just in time to witness the final moments of their daughter's life. Later, Ivania recounted how her son-in-law had called her earlier that day in an eerily indifferent tone, informing her that Mariam was in critical condition in the ICU. Instinctively, Ivania knew something terrible had happened. She screamed for her husband, and they rushed to the hospital. Upon their arrival, they were told Mariam had likely been the victim of a severe beating, but only an autopsy could confirm the exact cause of death. An attempt to cover up a crime. To everyone's shock and frustration, the autopsy results failed to definitively establish the cause of the 20-year-old's death. The official report given to her family stated that she had likely died from a traumatic brain injury caused by a fall. The tragedy was dismissed as an accident, with no mention of the bruises on her body or the marks on her neck that suggested strangulation. Ivania and Douglas, who were now raising their 9-month-old granddaughter, knew that the Bernes family was using their wealth and connections to shield the man responsible for their daughter's death and keep him out of prison. However, the Vallejo family refused to accept this injustice and began their own investigation. 4 months after Mariam's tragic death, they finally obtained an official report stating that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. Marvin was arrested on charges of killing his wife only in late July 2018. Until then, he had remained free, continuing to live a carefree bachelor's lifestyle, attending parties, and relying on his parents' money. He was reportedly shocked when the police arrived at his home, convinced he had successfully evaded any consequences. At that point, the investigation into Mariam's death began in earnest. However, reconstructing the events of the crime proved extremely challenging due to the months that had passed. Additionally, as previously noted, the scene of the incident had been thoroughly cleaned, and the house had since been rented out. Searching for evidence there was futile, so the investigation took another approach. Gathering evidence and witness testimonies. Formal charges against Marvin were brought in November 2019. He was accused of committing the crime under aggravating circumstances. Numerous witnesses, including friends and relatives of the victim, testified that Marvin had repeatedly mistreated Mariam, physically attacking her, belittling her, and maintaining obsessive control over her life. Mariam's father recounted how, months before her death, Marvin had already tried to strangle her. Douglas had intervened just in time, preventing what could have been another tragedy. The story of Mariam's earlier report to the police also resurfaced, how she had filed a complaint about an assault, only to withdraw it the next day under pressure from the Bernes family. Ivania shared additional accounts of Marvin's abusive behavior. On several occasions, she said, Marvin pushed Mariam with such force that she was injured in the fall. A paramedic who responded to the emergency on the day of Mariam's death recalled an inconsistency in Marvin's account. Marvin claimed that Mariam had locked herself in the bathroom, forcing him to break the door down with his shoulder. However, the paramedic noted that the bathroom door lock was intact and no signs of forced entry were visible. If Marvin had truly broken down the door, there would have been noticeable damage consistent with such an action. Another suspicious detail was the thorough cleaning of the bathroom immediately after Mariam was taken to the hospital. Although Marvin's mother and sister denied having done this, the timing and nature of their actions raised significant questions. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Mariam's body reported numerous bruises, abrasions, and other injuries consistent with prolonged and severe physical aggression. When Marvin was confronted with this information, he admitted that their marital argument that day had escalated into physical conflict. However, he insisted that Mariam had initiated the altercation, claiming she insulted him and struck him in the face first. According to Marvin, he only hit her a few times in self-defense and didn't cause any serious harm. The trial, custody battle, and final verdict. The trial of Marvin Bernes began in January 2017. The defendant adamantly denied responsibility for Mariam's death and presented his version of the events. He claimed that he and Mariam were both overwhelmed when they learned they were expecting a child, but he was determined to take responsibility, which is why he married her. However, he alleged that their relationship began to deteriorate after they moved in with Mariam's parents. Marvin argued that his in-laws constantly interfered in their marriage, creating tension and conflict between him and his wife. According to him, the situation worsened after the birth of their daughter. He claimed Mariam suffered from postpartum depression, which allegedly made her behavior unpredictable. She was sometimes aggressive and dangerous, and at other times, close to harming herself. Marvin said the only solution was to move to a separate home, but shortly after the move, the tragic incident occurred. In Marvin's version of events, after their final argument, Mariam went to take a bath, but she slipped, fell, and hit her head, which led to her death. To support his defense, Marvin's attorney hired an independent medical expert to challenge the official findings and argue that the cause of death was a head injury from an accidental fall. However, the court ultimately rejected this argument. Marvin's sister testified as a witness in court, attempting to portray Mariam as mentally unstable, aggressive, and obsessed with her brother for financial reasons. Marvin's mother echoed this narrative, claiming that Mariam had ongoing mental health issues and supporting the theory that her death was an accident. She insisted that she had repeatedly warned Mariam about the slippery bathroom floor and suggested using an anti-slip mat, which Mariam allegedly ignored, leading to the fatal incident. The Bernes family also announced their intent to seek custody of Luciana, arguing that, as the child's paternal relatives, they had more rights than the Vallejo family. They were confident that Marvin's innocence would soon be proven, and it was clear they believed in their ability to avoid accountability. However, on January 27, 2020, the court found Marvin guilty of premeditated homicide with aggravating circumstances and sentenced him to 50 years in prison. Despite numerous attempts to frame the incident as an accident, it was conclusively proven that Mariam's death was caused by mechanical asphyxiation. In addition to the prison sentence, Marvin was ordered to pay nearly $700,000 to Mariam's family as compensation for emotional distress. Marvin showed no reaction to the severe sentence, maintaining a detached demeanor. He refused to admit guilt or show any remorse. In his final statement, he claimed that his inability to prove his innocence was due to the case's media coverage. According to him, the portrayal of him as a monster had biased everyone in favor of the Vallejo family. All attempts to appeal the verdict have been denied. However, thanks to the Bernes family's wealth and connections, Marvin is serving his sentence under relatively lenient conditions. His cell reportedly resembles a hotel room, offering amenities such as access to a gym and quality meals. Meanwhile, Marvin's relatives continue to fight for custody of Luciana. The convicted man, with the help of his lawyer, is also preparing to file another appeal.